All right. Well, thank you very much for taking time to do
All
this.
right. I'm honored to be here.
So the class has been looking at some examples of strategy from private sector, from
Mm-hmm.
military, from nonprofit and government sector. You've had the unique experience of being in leadership roles in all of those areas. Can you talk a little bit about what you see as kind of the common threads about
Mm-hmm.
strategy across all of those sectors?
Yeah. So, um, well, first off, I think it's a great question. It's a challenging question. I think we often think of strategy as only applying to a business context where there's a profit motive. But the reality is that any organization, any group of people has scarce resources that it must allocate to try to achieve its objectives. And that's true for a nonprofit as much as it's true for the military, as it is for a university or a company. And so I think, at the core of strategy is how do we take those resources to most effectively achieve our objectives, and that's independent of the end goal of your organization. I think, and I was really pleased to hear as we were getting started that you guys are actually using good strategy, bad strategy as a text, because I think so many people talk about strategy, and so many people have rubrics and frameworks that are super complex, and I think Rummelt does a wonderful job of getting to the kernel. Even he uses
Mm-hmm.
that concept
Mm-hmm.
itself of what strategy actually is, and that is strength applied against greatest opportunity. And I think that's true for any organization. Is that how do we as an organization look at what we're trying to achieve, look at our strengths, and how we can take those strengths and find the greatest opportunity to which we should apply those strategies to achieve our ends.
Are there any specific challenges that the public sector, government, and nonprofit organizations have that maybe others don't?
I think it's certainly there are. I mean, I think there are different governance models that have to be in place. I think governance of an institution, of an organization, impacts how you can develop strategy and how quickly you can adapt that strategy. I think a privately held company can decide what it wants to do and maybe move a little bit more quickly than can a publicly held company, than could the U.S. military, and in some ways a university as well. So I think the speed with which you can do things does vary depending on the size of an organization and the governance structure of that organization. And those, because there are some nonprofits that can be very nimble and can develop strategies on the vision of the founder of that nonprofit, and they can move quickly. And there's some profit-driven enterprises, like a big multinational company has literally millions of investors, that require a very long and diligent process of stakeholder buy-in before it can make a major shift in strategy. So I think we often think that profit motive or not, or whether it's a government or nonprofit, is the determining factor. But I actually think there's a lot more nuance to it than that.
Okay. So you mentioned Rummelt's kernel of
Mm-hmm.
good strategy. And so our students, for the most part, have been kind of using that concept and working on strategy projects. So
Yeah.
we're in the diagnosis phase, understanding what is. We're starting to transition into the guiding policy, kind of where we want the organization to go.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that always seems to be the most difficult is the third part of that, the execution, the coherent action that he talks
Right.
about. So talk a little bit about that in your role as an organizational leader.
Yeah.
How do you get an organization to change, to align and sustain coherent actions?
Right. Well, I think that's the toughest part. I think putting a strategy together on a piece of paper, while not easy, is orders of magnitude less difficult than actually driving sustained progress to achieving that strategy. And so I think the best organizations that I've been a part of are very clear about, okay, if we say this is our strategy, then breaking that down to say these are our objectives, this is what we believe to be how we would measure success in achieving those objectives, and then which ultimately come down to metrics or some sort of objective way of articulating that, which then translates into an operating rhythm with which you ask those two fundamental questions of any organizational leader of their teams, which is, are we on track? And how do we know? So, you need to say, are we on track to achieving our objectives? And how do we objectively know that as best we can? And so the best organizations, it's not all about metrics and quantifying everything, but it is being clear about how we're defining success and how we are what are the lagging indicators of success and what are the leading indicators of success. So for example, take the University of Montana. We are very much focused on enhancing student retention and persistence and completion rates. But the cohort of students that just entered this fall, if we think about a 6-year graduation rate, we can't wait 6 years to know whether or not what we're doing in their first semester actually mattered. So a 6-year graduation rate or a 4-year graduation rate, those are very much lagging indicators of success. And so what are those leading indicators that you as an organizational leader need to be aware of and be tracking with your teams? So in the case of student retention, what % of our students are taking 15 credits or more is one. What, because that's going to indicate, we know that students that take 15 credits or more are more likely to graduate on time, but also more likely to persist. I mean, it's somewhat counterintuitive. They perform better, but we know that's a leading indicator that we have to look at. And I could cite 10 other examples, but I think whenever you lay out the operational execution plan to achieve your strategy, you have to be pretty clear on how you're going to know whether you're on track or not.
You used the term, I think you said operational rhythm a little bit ago. So I think about that as the processes and systems and actually down to individual habits, which kind of make up a culture.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about, what you think of as organizational culture and what the leader's role is in shaping culture.
Another good question. The leader plays a really key role in shaping the culture, but shaping it through the mechanisms by which we mutually agree on objectives and hold ourselves accountable to achieving them. And a culture is a hard thing. If you set about saying, well, I'm going to change the culture, that's an amorphous, nebulous concept. You can't really get your hands around it. But what you can do is say, this is what we want to achieve. This is the way in which we want to achieve it, meaning the values of the organization. And this is how we're actually going to track ourselves, not just in achieving the objectives, but holding ourselves accountable, not just to each other, but to the results, but to the way in which we want to achieve those. And so you think about how's that then translate into an operating rhythm? Well, it's making sure that everybody on the team knows, okay, these are the things for which I'm responsible, and the ways in which we're going to measure those, the cadence on which we're going to track our progress, and the way in which we're going to report out to each other. And I think that helps you drive an accountability and a focus on results. And then in terms of the values, which is really important in shaping culture, you have to have not just your hiring, but your promotion and your rewards and incentive systems take into account in a big way the values that you want to achieve as an institution. So some of the best organizations I've been a part of, you look at both performance and values. So yes, this person's delivering results, but are they a jerk? And if they're a jerk and they deliver results, they don't last long. Now, if they're a really great person but they don't deliver results, they also don't last long. What you want are the people that deliver results but do so in a way that is aligned with the values of your organization. And the best ones are best organizations are very, very focused on that.
Mm-hmm. One of the readings we have coming up soon is Jim Collins, Good to Great, and I know one of the things he talks about with strategy is the first question isn't where you're going, but it's
the right people on the bus.
Who's on the bus, right?
Yeah.
So I know in your first year that seemed to be a big part of your agenda of getting key leadership roles filled.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think it absolutely has been a focus, and I think, but you also have to focus on how you organize the seats on a bus and how roles are clear and coordinated. Take the University of Montana. We made some pretty big structural changes early in the year, and I around our recruiting and marketing efforts. When I joined, those were in two different sectors, and frankly, I found myself having an enrollment person saying to the marketing person, well, they didn't give me my materials to recruit effectively, and the marketing person said, you never told me. And the reality is, we need to be telling our story and bringing new students here in a coordinated way. And so we restructured that. And then I think we also, I saw a little bit of a challenge in that, we had together enrollment and student affairs, which is bringing new students in, but also supporting and enabling those who are currently here. There's some similarities there, but I felt like supporting students that are here in and out of the classroom is more important. So we put together our student success efforts from an academic side with our student affairs side as well. And that's just to ensure clarity and alignment of effort. And then you have to find people that are energized by that type of role. You have to find the right people who have the skill sets, and we did in Kathy Cole and in John Harbour. And then there's that intangible that you have to say, what, and it's hard to do this in an interview process, but are these people passionate about your institution and the values of the institution? And I think those are the things, again, that are really hard to tease out during an interview process, but so critically important, the motivations of the people. And I think you see somebody like Kathy Cole, who joined us, and then it was a great, I've quoted her a bunch of times, but in her one of the articles, interview she did for the Missoula Current, the online news source, she said, look, if I don't do my job and I miss our enrollment numbers, I lose my job, but I signed up for that. She said, but the reason I get up at 5 a.m, the reason I'm in on the weekends is because if I don't do my job well, other people are impacted, the groundskeeper, the staff member, the faculty member. And that's the type of focus and character that is really important. That's where Jim Collins is right. It's not just talent, but it's character and values.
I think there's one thing that I remember from my experience in the MPA program. It was the lesson from I'm blanking the name, but basically the idea that the best organizations exhibit simultaneous loose type properties.
Yeah.
That you want you want looseness in that people are they have the freedom to do the job the way they want to do it, and yet you need that some control over everybody doing work in the same direction, and the idea that that's really done through shared values. So I don't know how
values. I think I'd add to I think it's a great point. We had an old saying in Special Forces. So I was in U.S. Army Special Forces for a while. The saying was that the smaller the team, the farther from headquarters, the more effective that team was. But I'd say it's really, there are some prerequisites to make that maxim true. And I think, yes, it is about values, but it's also about clarity of objectives and competence and expertise of the team members. that's enforced by a culture of accountability to results, because it's all well and good to say we're going to be autonomous, but if you don't have people who have the right values and the right skills and expertise and the right guidance from their leader, the intent of what they're trying to achieve, it's chaos. So I think you see sometimes organizations try to go to this decentralized model without having those prerequisites, and that's just going to spell incoherence and lack of clarity. So again, I'm a firm believer in that, but it's even more important for the leader to be clear about what the intent is. What are we trying to achieve? Not how. Where are we trying to head? And then rely on the expertise and the skills of the people to get us there, and then have a culture of joint mutual accountability to results. That's the way that kind of loose, tight culture really works well.
Great. One last question.
Yeah.
So we've talked, a lot in this class about the fact that a lot of organizations are really struggling with adapting to change, kind of being forced through technology, through
Right.
outside forces. And I guess the question is, how do you, as a leader, especially in a fairly large, complex organization, how do you balance kind of that need for really kind of reactive, urgent, crisis-solving decisions with what we know you have to sustain over a long period of time to really change and be the kind of organization you want? How do you balance those two things?
Like the short-time urgency of change and the long-term impacts, or the recognition that results won't come for a long time.
Right.
I think there's a lot of different ways you can go in answering that. I mean, I think every organization and every leader has to be very aware that this is really a time of a question of, disrupt yourself or you'll be disrupted. And so I think, one important thing for the emerging leaders, I think, in the class to recognize is you have to continuously force yourself to learn and make yourself uncomfortable as a leader, because you have to make sure your organization is ready to adapt. And unfortunately, I've seen that multiple times throughout my career, whether it was, I went to West Point in the 1990s. We couldn't conceive of 9/11. And we, over the course of the 2000s, the U.S. military, the country's oldest and largest bureaucracy, large organization, actually underwent an incredibly rapid period of innovation. Now, they were under, a context of innovate or die, but they did so grounded in some kind of theory and context of why and where they're headed and why this is important. So I think that's important for any leader to understand the context of the disruption that their organization is facing, and have some sort of logic behind why it is we need to change and where we're headed. I think that is the way you can both drive that urgency for change, but with an idea and a vision to where the organization's headed long term. I mean, I think you see a lot of organizations that, under the banner of adapting, are kind of nibbling at the margins and frantically doing things that don't matter. That old adage of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic.
That's kind of what I was getting at with the question, right?
And so I think people can sustain rapid change if you show them why it has to happen and why it's going to be better after. But I think a lot of leaders, and it's tough, right? It's really tough because we know something's wrong and we think all activity is work, and the reality is a lot of activity ends up being just distractions from solving that core problem. So I don't think there's a tension between short-term urgency and long-term results if you have clarity of understanding of the challenge you face and a strategy to address it. And that's the magic sauce that is leadership, that is strategy, which is the toughest thing to get right.
It seems like one of the things that organizations are challenged with also is stopping doing things that don't make sense anymore and
Yeah.
letting go of things. And so,
Yeah.
you know,
Well, there's whole fields of study in there
Yeah.
of how hard it is to stop things or give things up that you
Right.
have been doing.
Yes.
But and that's that. I mean, whole Clayton Christensen is the innovator's dilemma. I mean, and I think it's harder for big organizations to adapt. I mean, it's the story of Kodak. You know, it's really hard
Right.
to give up the film business, even though you know digital's happening. It's why these micro steel mills that he talks about were able to adapt. It's why some of the foreign Japanese automakers were able to move in, because it was really hard to change things that have been working, and it's easier almost to start from scratch with new and better ideas. And that's just something we have to be aware of. I mean, I don't think there's a salve to it other than just leadership awareness of it and clarity and pushing yourself to have pockets of innovation. I think there's been a lot of organizations actually carve out.
I was going to ask about that
yeah.
as a strategy.
So I think one of the things that that GE did that I thought was very wise actually is it said there's the core business and aspects of that we got to keep running, but if we're going to build new and different products, if we're going to adapt this company, we have to maybe carve out some space where people are going to think like a startup would. They brought in Eric Ries, who wrote The Lean Startup, and a lot of the methodology to think about the MVPs, minimally viable products, and how do we adapt and how do we learn quickly and think like a startup within a large company. I mean, I think, and a lot of our students today are going to end up at startups. A lot of them are going to end up at big companies though too, and I think the idea that the only place where you can be innovative or where you need to be innovative is in a startup is total fallacy. I mean, big companies need to figure out ways to innovate and adapt themselves, or they risk being part of old Schumpeter's creative destruction model.
So do you envision implementing that sort of a model here at the university?
Absolutely. I think we're doing it in pockets. I think we've seen it with summer this year. We've changed the model. We've changed the budget allocation model and how we think about new summer offerings. We are looking at some of our programs. Missoula College is doing a good analysis of offerings that they can put forward relatively quickly and then change course if they need to. And that's a little bit tougher in an academic context where you put out academic programs that then admit students, and you can't pull the rug out from under students. Right. But we're trying it with some of our shared services, some of the other areas where we're saying, all right, what if we thought about this differently? And because we have to think about new ways we can do things, or we risk irrelevance or worse.
All right.
Well,
thank you for your time.
Thank you, and thank you for leading these discussions. This is super interesting. I wish I could participate and just be a student in the class too. Maybe I'll come by sometime and listen.
Well, it's an online class.
Yep.
So,
all right.
Some of our students are in Missoula, but we've got students scattered across the state. So,
all right.
Yeah. So,
well, it's nice meeting you all.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks, Cody. Take care.